Hello, and welcome to Pillar Talk. I am your host, Rochelle Armstrong, and during each episode, we're going to have guests from different backgrounds or professions, and they're going to pick one of the pillars in my book, Simply Complex, Leading Out of Authenticity, and they're going to share with us how that pillar has impacted their lives negatively or positively, and how it really shaped them in becoming the person they are today. So today we have an extra special guest, Mrs. Gail Bibb. How are you doing today, Gail?
I am so good, and I'm so grateful to be here with you today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. I feel like we haven't seen each other and we haven't had an opportunity to catch up in a while. So anything interesting going on in your world that you want to share with us briefly?
I'm just really grateful. I feel like my path lately has been about routines and learning how to balance mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. And so really trying to get morning routine and evening routines together has kind of been my focus. And it's really been a really exciting journey to be able to do that. So that's kind of where I am in my wellness journey as it sits today.
So let's talk about that a little more, because since a lot of people may not know exactly what you do, why don't you tell our listeners, what do you do for a living, Gail?
Yeah, so I am a holistic therapy and integrative wellness coach. So I practice therapy, I do life coaching. I'm also a personal trainer and nutrition coach. So I really value holistic wellness and really creating different modalities for clients to reach healing through those different platforms, mind, body, and spirit.
Oh, I love that. And I can use that. And I'm sure some of our listeners can too. So before we get really deep into the conversation, and I forget to ask how people can reach you, would you please give a form of contact information if somebody would like to receive your services and how they can reach you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on the web at revivecounselingwellness.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Revive Counseling Wellness. So either platform, you can reach me and find out more about wellness.
I love it. Thank you so much. I'm all about well-being. I'm all about trying to be healthy emotionally, physically, financially, and spiritually. So our listeners are there. If not, maybe this is a good time to start thinking about it. So we have you here today to talk about identity.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to share something with you. Up until this point, every last interview has been on environment.
Oh,
Super cool, right? So each story has been really different. You would think because it's environment that you're going to hear some similarity, and maybe slightly, but for the most part, staying true to the focus is different people from different backgrounds talking about how their environment has shaped them. So when I saw identity, I got excited because I'm looking forward to hearing how identity has really shaped you as the woman that we know and love today. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the interview. Literally, I just asked the question basically, which is, how has identity impacted you, Gail, and helped you become the woman you are today, negatively and positively?
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this pillar as well. When I think about identity, I think about my childhood and how I came to know who I was. And the thing that sticks out to me most prevalently is when I was about, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years old. I was sitting on the porch, entertaining my friends in the neighborhood. We were just hanging out, having a good time. And there was this lady at our house that my mother was entertaining at the time. And she came to the porch and she said, "Gail, your mom wants you." And I was not paying this lady any attention whatsoever. I was minding my business, entertaining my friends and having a good time. And she came back out. She was really pestering me. She was like, "Gail, your mom wants you." And I was like, "Lady, what do you want? And she was like, your mom wants you. I said, lady, I'm busy. And she then interrupts me and she says, well, you need to listen to me because I'm your real mom anyway.
Okay, listeners, you can't see my face, but I had just imagine the wow emoji.
Wow was an understatement. I was confused. I was bewildered. I think I was angry. I just I didn't know how to conceptualize what she was saying. Now, mind you, I'm in the midst of entertaining my
Of
friends,
course.
and I'm hearing this information for the first time as it's coming to their ears as well. And so I would go into the house and I would be really angry and demanding that my mom tell me, what is this lady talking about? Right? Because
Sure.
I don't know who you are outside of you just kind of being this guest that comes over occasionally. It would develop into this confession that I was adopted.
Oh.
And the lady who in fact came to the door was my biological mom, who I did not know, was outside of a family friend. But unbeknownst to me, she was privy to being able to kind of be around and watch us grow up and be at different holidays and different things like that. But she was unable to take care of us independently and fully. And so the story would maturate to where I would become aware that she was mentally ill.
Okay.
And she had diagnoses to where she was not able to take care of herself, let alone, myself and my siblings. And so it was at that time where my identity was stricken. I didn't know where did I belong, what family origin, who am I really? I had no clue. My mom, when I say my mom, I'm talking about the lady that raised me. We had a drug problem. She would drag us to church Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We were in church constantly. I really did think that we had this drug problem because we were drugged constantly. I mean, prayer meetings, Bible study, choir rehearsal. We was always in the church. And it was the very next year that I came to know who I was in Christ. And it was a scripture that I didn't know scripture prior to this, but it was the scripture that said, even when my father and my mother forsake me, I am your God. And that took hold in my heart that if I don't know anything else, God knows who I am.
Yes.
And he has a purpose and a plan for me. And I gave myself to Christ that very Sunday. I mean, I ran down to the front and they said, Gail, do you know what you're doing? And I was fully aware of what was happening. And I said, yeah, I want to be saved. I believe that Jesus is for me, that he died for me. And that is kind of where I took root into my identity. I didn't know nothing else to be true because I could not trust humans.
I see. Yes, I'm hearing you and I'm feeling you, Gail. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
so
let
me process. No, finish your thought before I process your story out. Go ahead.
No. So I think that it was, it was so, it seems like a whirlwind, but during the process of becoming to know my identity, it didn't feel like it was an easy process. There was many nights where I would cry, would be angry, would have all of the emotions before I got to the acceptance of it, right? We go through bargaining, we go through depression, we go through denial, like this can't be real, before I really acclaim to acceptance and that acceptance of knowing that God has this plan for me, even despite my knowing or understanding to that point.
I am completely blown away. There is no way I could have possibly known this story. I'm not sure if you've ever given your testimony. I am so humbled, seriously, Gail, that you're sharing this. on
Mm,
this podcast because, you know, people always say you look at people, but we don't look like what we've been through. And people can
mm-hmm.
see you today and you're always positive, you're always happy, you're always encouraging others. And I'm sure a lot of this has to do with your biological mother, because some of that's DNA, right? Some of it is
Mm-hmm.
genetics, but a lot to do with your adopted mother. So I want to talk a
Mm-hmm.
little more about this time frame because you said when you were outside and you were entertaining your friends, you was like 7 or 8 years old, right?
Yes.
And your birth mother, she walked up trying to get your attention. And until
Mm-hmm.
she got your attention, she made the announcement in front of everybody, not just you.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sure as a child, you were taken aback and didn't really know how to process it. But at the same time, I kind of want to get into those emotions that you felt that she did that in front of an audience of people that may not have been as close or intimate as family. And I don't know, were you embarrassed? Was you nervous? Were you scared? Like, what emotions came with that?
I think immediately I was confused. I did not know how to register what she was saying because, in the manner in which she divulged this information, it didn't come from a loving place. It came from this position of authority, of almost as if you're entitled to get me to do something for you. And I was confused because I had not dealt with this lady in this manner before, to where any memory prior to that is something that I remember, right? There was nothing dynamic in 7 to 8 years that you have made in my life to warrant this level of respect or authority. And so immediately I was confused, but then I became angry because if there's any validity of what she's saying, why am I now finding out in this way? This is
Yes.
unfair. So I
Unfair.
felt like there was an injustice that happened, and I was angry and confused. That I think is the only thing that registered that entire day. I think the ideal of my friends, I think they were probably confused right along with me. Like,
Okay.
they're looking at me like, Gail, what did she mean? Like,
Yes. And I asked that specifically because you read my book. And so you know a lot of my story. And I remember growing up, Gail, just being embarrassed by some of the things that my family would do or like some of the situations that I was in. And so although I wasn't in that specific situation, I could kind of relate and could feel like maybe some of the emotions that you were going through because I've been in similar situations. And so once you did go in and you talked to your birth mom about it, what was her reaction to it?
I think that's probably the saving grace between all of it, because my adoptive mom has always been one that's been very loving and giving. And it wasn't dismissive at all. It was very nurturing. It was compassionate. And I think that there was a level of shared anger of how it came out. And I felt comforted in being upset before any explanation came out as to what happened or why it happened. I just remember being comforted, like, it was okay for me to cry. And she was upset that, that this information had came out in that same way. I think later on, it would be explained to me, not only, am I adopted, but I had 2 older siblings and 1 younger. And so, unbeknownst to me, my older siblings had already known that they were adopted. I don't know if that's just, because they were, up in the teen ages. And my younger brother is a year younger than me, that it was not the time for them to disclose this information.
Sure.
But then I was just like, what do I know to be true? Like, it shook everything that I knew to be true to that point. And it just made things feel very unstable for me mentally.
No, and that makes a lot of sense when I hear you explain it that way. And only because I am very curious. And that's one of the reasons I like to interview people, because I want to know more about your story, is knowing that your birth mom has a mental illness. All is kind of forgiven at this point, right? We can reflect back, kind of. I kind of see your head nodding. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
When I was hearing the story initially, before you added the mental illness, I was thinking, wow, that's a lot. But then it's almost like once you said she had a mental illness, I mentally kind of, I don't want to say forgave her, because it's not my place to forgive her.
Oh, I see.
Understood. I was like, oh, so that kind of makes sense. Maybe she couldn't help herself. But you didn't seem to agree with that. So let's talk about it, Gail.
We have to talk about it. And I think one of the most important things is that developmentally, as children, the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, is not online. We operate from the amygdala, the emotion mind. And so I didn't have the capacity to even know, right? And I don't think it became evident that she had a mental illness until a few episodes later, a couple of years later, to where I became privy to witnessing this mental illnesses on full display. She was diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. And so she had a lot of delusions. She would be paranoid. She would have hallucinations. And one day she had came over to visit, and she would go onto this psychotic trip. And I don't know if many people are familiar with schizophrenia or bipolar when it comes to mental illness, but she's the type of person that is required to be on her medication. And when she is not on her medication, she often finds herself barefooted in the street. In Kentucky, we have our mental hospital called Central State. And so the police would be called, and she would go to Central State to be regulated back on her medicine. And oftentimes people with schizophrenia, during the maturation of their illness, they feel like they don't need medicine anymore. And when they get off their medicine, it becomes to be this psychotic delusional break that they have. And so I witnessed that one time. And again, in our community, when I was growing up, mental illness, not like it is now, where it's becoming to be more accepted and the stigma is diminishing a little bit more. There was no information. There's no awareness. It was just that this person's crazy. And that was the label. It wasn't, we didn't identify them with their diagnosis. We didn't even know what that meant. We just knew that this person was crazy and they need to take their medicine. And I think that was the gist of it. And so I think for me, it grew another identity layer for me, because I became very curious about what is mental illness? What does this mean? Why can't people take care of people? Like, why is she not able to parent me? I was so angry and confused. But it also created this path that I'm now living out of as a mental health therapist. But that came from me not knowing about what mental illness was in my family. And that was the path that led me to producing my career and my passion for mental health.
Nicely stated. I don't think I've ever heard it quite explained that way. So thank you for explaining it to me. Thank you for explaining it to our audience, because mental illness is real. It's very prevalent throughout any community, and we have to talk about it. And so I'm so glad that this is the topic of discussion today, because we haven't had the opportunity to talk about such things just so openly and so honestly. So I just applaud you for your courage for doing that. So as I dig a little deeper into your story, I kind of want to understand the understanding that apparently your birth mother had with your adopted mother. So tell me a little more about, in most cases, adopted parents, they kind of keep the birth parents away. So tell us a little more about that arrangement.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about typical families these days, there's nothing that is typical anymore,
No.
right? There's nothing typical about or family of origins. And the story will kind of come out that my adoptive mom was my bio mom's stepmom. She
Makes
was
sense.
not.
I see the okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was her stepmom, and they had a strange relationship because of, marrying her father. So, if we were raised together, then it would have been as though this lady that came around was my aunt. Right.
Yes.
It would have been that way. But their relationship was so strained that she was not around. And so I didn't know the connection of what the relationship was as a kid. It's just as a lady that's coming around. I don't know why she's coming around. But it was my adoptive mom that was her stepmom. And so she raised her, right? Since she was, I think, she adopted, or she was her stepmom in her teenage years. So when she was about 16, my bio mom moved from Florida with her dad, who was a truck driver, and married my adoptive mom. And so she raised her her entire life. So that was the arrangement.
No, and thank you for sharing that, because Curious Rochelle here want all the details, and I'm sure my little nosy listeners probably want to know also. And so thank you for kind of give us context around that. So I'm going to continue to process out your story, going back to your timeline. So you talked about you got this revelation, astonishing, at 7 or 8 years old. But then a couple of years later, you said that you got saved and you gave your life to Christ. Yes. So you're still fairly young, which is really speaks to why you're so wise and just such I don't want to say old soul. Some may take that as a compliment. It's definitely meant as a compliment coming from me to you. And so it helps me to kind of understand more of how you're wired up. And so once you gave your life to Christ and you said that you were able to kind of reconcile with your identity, I want to know a little more about your relationship with your birth mom after your experience with Christ.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm sure all of the listeners want to know that part. And the relationship after that period became more cordial because her presence around was more understood, but I did not accept it as this identity. To me, my older siblings probably were more receptive of her in that role of kind of this duality of that you got kind of like two moms, like this pseudo mom that comes in, you know, for holidays. But for me, I had allegiance to my adoptive mom, and any participation of, that I sharing this identity with this other lady was a threat to that.
I see.
And I was very loyal, and I don't know if this was something that was maturated from anyone other than my mindset, that because you were not here, whatever the elements that, prevented you from being my mom, then you don't deserve to be my mom. You don't deserve that title. You don't deserve that allegiance. You don't deserve that affection. And it almost was like a threat that if I, would have done that, it just wouldn't seem appropriate.
Okay.
And so my bio mom, well, let me go back. My adoptive mom passed away about 7 years ago. And it was
sorry to hear that. I got to give my condolences. Whatever I hear, I'm always sorry to hear that, especially given that it was just 7 years ago. And I see the love and affinity that you have for her. So
I do.
my thoughts
Thank you. Thank you. And it was after that period when my adoptive mom passed away that I had a bit more interest to come to understand my adoptive mom a little bit more. It seemed like the loyalty, barrier had been lifted, and I became a bit more curious. Now, this is also the time period where I am full enthroned into college and psychology, and really pursuing this identity of mental health professional. And so I'm really curious at this point, and I would figure out where was she, and it come to find out she was in this she was in like this assisted living house, some parts of Kentucky, that I was not privy to. Obviously I'm in college and I'm not close to that environment, but that's kind of what I've heard of. Like, she was in this assisted living because she could no longer take care of herself. And so prior to me being able to have like a real conversation to understand her, she passed away. It would be...
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was really recent. So about 2 years ago, she passed away. And so that opportunity, there's a bit of a grief there of like that longing of... Yeah.
I can relate to that. So you see that I'm getting emotional because I think the misconception when you're bio, I like that term, and I like filling language. I think the misconception is when your birth parent or that your bio parent doesn't raise you, that when they pass, when they die, that it doesn't impact you the same as it does someone who was close to their parent. This is what I argue. It's almost like a second death because you already missed the opportunity to have a relationship with this person during their life, or you had somewhat of a relationship with them, but you always had your hope that you can have a relationship with them. It's always there. Right. So when they die, we no longer have that hope that we're going to have that relationship. And so you lost a mom twice, but in some ways it feels like it's more than that because you lost your adopted mom and then you lost your biological mom, and you really didn't get that relationship or maybe understanding of her that you were hoping for. And so tell us a little more about how that impacted you once she died.
That is so true. And I think I felt that grief. It's so interesting. My adoptive mom, I was her power of attorney in her elder age. She was much older. And I sat at the bedside with her when she breathed her last breath. And it was so powerful and very divine experience because I know that I had served her well and I loved her well. And it was just a gift to be able to help her to transition in that way where she suffered no more. But it almost surprised me a bit of the grief of, my bio mom, passing away. There was no relationship there that I grieved. It was the grief of a part of me is now buried because you're gone. Yes. Because that place of I will never know things that I can never know. Yes. And that burdens me. And I didn't grieve in a way that said, man, I missed so much, because we didn't have anything that I could miss. But she was taking parts of my identity with her that I could no longer ask questions about, research about, or any of that. The story of who I am from her experience of what happened or why it happened in her own words that I no longer got again.
I hear you, and I totally can relate to that, and I get it. So You said that was a couple of years ago.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about, and listeners, I'll let you in on our inside conversation. So before we started recording, I had shared something with Gail that I heard on a different podcast where the host said that you should share scars, but not open wounds, basically stating that we can kind of talk about things that we're healed from, which is why I was able to write a book and talk about some very personal, intimate, dark, ugly things, but I'm healed from those things. But open wounds, like things that we're still going through, they're a little more sensitive. So you really are not ready to talk about those things. And I still have those as well. And so knowing that that was a couple of years ago, and now you're able to actually have these conversations and you're actually able to talk about it, do you feel like you have forgiven your mother? And do you feel like you have closure?
Really good question. I think that I forgave her well before she passed away, because I don't think that I would have been able to develop and be who I am if I did not. And that is largely in part due to my relationship with Christ,
Yeah.
and knowing what it means to be fully forgiven and accepted. And because I am fully loved and fully forgiven, I then can give that back. And because I received that so profoundly, it was a gift that I gave to her well before she knew that that was the case. And the healing process, I think, is always ongoing. But for me, this is always development, right? Everything, every year you add something to your story that makes you who you are. And it's not ended, because at her funeral, I come to be aware that she was one of 14 kids, and all of her siblings came to the funeral. So then I became a niece to all of.
So sweet. Oh my God.
I mean, and talk about. I mean, obviously, I'm in my 30s at this point, but talk about, for 30 years, this is a family identity. You've been wanting to connect with somebody to say, these are my bloodline people, and then be given that gift at her departure. Yes. Who is to say that that would have ever happened in her life? It hadn't up until that point, but it created life and relationship at her departure. And so I believe taking the good with the bad.
Absolutely.
Because that's what makes you, right?
It does. It does. So you have shared just so much of not only your personal story, but I believe information, and you've shared knowledge that can help us to better understand the relationship when it comes to either your bio and your adopted parents. You're helping us to understand mental illness, forgiveness, how forgiveness really is for you, because you're forgiven and you want forgiveness. In turn, we should forgive. So I'm just getting so many nuggets out of this conversation. And so before we wrap up, I don't want to keep you all day, although I could talk to you all day. To get a little deeper into your identity, I want to know, based on those experiences, even though you were younger, and you talked a little bit about how that impacted you, even just a couple of years ago, when you show up, Gail, I know you to be a coach, not even just like a basketball coach. I know you to be a wellness coach. When you show up, how has all those things that has helped shape your identity, when you show up in relationships, when you show up at work, when you show up as coach, how has that impacted you negatively and positively? Just one or two examples.
Yeah. Well, it's easier to think for me about the positives, because I think it's my story that helps me to connect with my clients in different ways. And the details may be different, but as children, we are all given we're all dealt cards that we did not ask to be given. I mean,
That's
we
right.
were given a name before we could talk, right? I
Yes.
didn't choose this name. And that's another part of my identity. My name, I was named after my biological mom. First, middle, and last name. We have the same birthday.
How ironic.
It's crazy. And after I became aware that I was adopted, I changed my name. So my first name was not Gail. It was Brunetta, which was her name, which I did not want any part of, knowing where it came from. And so I claimed my middle name. Yeah. So I connect with people's pain from their childhood woundings, right? Because I've been that kid. And I know that a lot of our pain comes from our original attachment figures. And the work that I do now is a lot of childhood trauma. And so when we're talking about wellness and we're talking about identity or we're talking about mental health, a lot of the places where we get stuck, it didn't start with us.
No.
Right? If I'm stuck in life at my self-esteem, it didn't start with me, right? Where did these stories and these narratives come from? If I have an eating disorder, if I'm overweight, it didn't start with me. I didn't cook my first meal, right? Like it started with before I had control. And so I think I connect on a positive level with individuals in that way. I think where they're how I show up that may be negative. That's a good question.
Let me throw you a bone. Is that okay? Adage? Okay, let me throw you. So let me help you out. Let me just say this first. I understand and I respect wanting to focus on the positive.
Yeah.
I think the reason why I'm compelled to ask people about the negative is because I want people to know that just because they have certain thoughts or just because they act out maybe painful experiences, that it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't define you. And I want people to be able to relate to you and your story. And so I don't want to always hear like unicorns and rainbows and like, everything is so perfect. And maybe it is. And if it is, I want to hear from you too, because we want to know what that life looks like and what we can do to maybe shape that. But as Gail eloquently stated, we weren't dealt the hands we were given. Nobody was. You were born into that family, you were born into that environment, and it helped shape your identity. And so when you're saying like, I don't really want to talk about the negative, as a therapist and a counselor, you even know that could be a trigger. When I say, let me throw you a bone, I'm sincerely saying, let me jump in and let me pull you out of this because we don't have to stay there. I'll give you a little insight as to why I asked and why I'm so interested because of how things have shaped my identity and how I would show up. I would like to believe I'm better, but what I really say is I'm becoming. I'm still becoming the person that I know that I can be. My identity is still being formed. But because of some of the things associated with my DNA or my environment, I felt like in some ways I would show up confident, but would easily get discouraged. Like it wouldn't take a lot for you to throw a blow and me and my confidence to be shot down. Now I'm going to come back. You will not keep me down. But unfortunately, because I didn't come from a place of like strong identity and like knowing who I am, I felt like it was easily shaken. And so I'm always curious when I see strong, confident, courageous people is what happens when your identity is impacted negatively, like you had to go through some stuff. And so how do you use that negative and turn it into a positive? You shared but go ahead.
I think there are definitely negatives that have been turned to positives, but thank you for those examples because it helped me to identify where the negatives have been, and then where there may be one or two lingering negatives.
Okay.
And I think, and maybe we don't always, I mean, some people can just have a mindset of where they're, aware or hyper aware of the negatives. I'm not that necessarily that type of person, but with a little prompting, the bone that you throw me, I can kind of see. I think the first thing that I thought about was the seed of bitter or resentment in my heart. I was angry for a very long time. I mean, I had homicidal thoughts like, I want to kill this lady. My adoptive mom, she had guns in the house. She was a country girl. Her nickname was Gunny. That's just a norm for her.
I love it.
And I knew where she stored that thing. And I said, when this lady comes over, I'm going to kill her. Or I would just have these desires that she would just, accidentally step out in front of a bus and somebody would run over her. I was so angry. I was so angry. And obviously I can kind of turn that into compassion of that hurt and that wounded girl. But one place where it lingers now, another negative that I don't think people would love to hear about this, but I self-soothed or coped after that incident with sucking my thumb. I didn't suck my thumb my entire life. I started from that point and it maturated into adulthood. Yes. To where I would use my, thumb sucking to kind of go to sleep, to like comfort myself. And that was a very negative, habit that was very, very, very hard to break, even in adult life. Like, don't catch me on a bad day. I might have a relapse or something. But I've heard this. Yeah. So that was something that developed because of that. Braces and thousands of dollars later, we could probably hide it a little bit better, but I still have like a list to where, because of how my teeth were formed before, it impacts the way that I speak. And that can be a confidence, deterrent, because I speak for a living and I talk to people all day, but it's not, because I've owned my story and why.
That's right.
But the other part that I don't really like to talk about, because I always like to shape it differently, but I don't really have a desire to have kids because of this. I have more of a desire to adopt. Of course. And even as a therapist, and knowing that a lot of childhood woundings and how relationships are always like the pivotal point of why people come to therapy, it really deters me of wanting to have that of my own. And there's something, for whatever reason, the child or me not bonding or conflict or what have you, that I just, and I think subconsciously, I married an older man where that's not a primary, role.
Sure, right.
To have that. But I think subconsciously it's because of that disruption in that relationship that, I don't know, I'm not one of those girls. It's like, oh, I just can't wait to have kids. No. Now we can adopt them.
Yes, but I'm hearing, because of the similarities and admiration for your adopted mom.
Yes.
So you're constantly wanting to be more like her.
Yes.
And much less like your bio mom. So exactly. To me, as I'm listening to you, it makes so much sense. And something you said as well is not everyone is self-aware, but I think sometimes our brain has a way of protecting us from some of the things that maybe we don't need to be aware of. I think sometimes I am hyper aware, and I don't want that, because I'm constantly having to process and reflect. And, as you stated, I need a self-care. I need your services. So we need to talk after this. But even for you, as you're being open and transparent, is hoping that you have, that support group, because not everyone has a coach or a therapist, but knowing that you have your faith, but also that support group that can help be there for you now that you've opened this up, that can really help to make sure that you are continuing to heal and this goes into a healthy place. And so what I want to end on is a positive note. I've had you kind of open up about some pain points or some things that identity has been impacted negatively. But I want to end us on a happy note, and I want us to help share your story with others because I know that it's going to help them through some difficult times. And so, what advice or what encouragement would you give those who are listening who come from a very similar background as you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is embracing your narrative. I think the very thing that keeps people stuck and in dis-ease is pushing things away, avoiding it, not dealing with it, covering it. And that's a process in and of itself, is to reveal it, to open it up, to share it, like what you're saying. But that's the only way that you can heal. You cannot heal what you don't reveal.
Yes.
And so I think owning your story and giving yourself some grace, because like you said, we were not privy to the hand that we were dealt. We can only play the cards the best way that we know how. And so revealing your hand and accepting it for what it is.
Excellent. So typically I try to do like a recap at the end, but all of my guests are so brilliant that you do that for me. And so I won't be redundant today anyway to do that again. Gail, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your honesty. I want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you for giving us hope and encouragement. And I just wish you and your business to be successful. I want you to continue to lead out of authenticity because that's what you do. And for our listeners, I hope that you do glean hope from this interview today and that you be open and honest with yourself. Like, you don't have to share your truth with anybody else, but be honest with yourself and work on that healing process. And for some people, that may be therapy. For some people, that may be their faith. It may be a confidant, but you don't have to be stuck. You don't have to stay there. So I'm just going to ask that you please rate and review this podcast to help our community grow in the podcast world. And tune in next week for our episode, Pillar Talk with Rochelle, Leading Authentically.